So this mortal will put on immortality, and this corruptible will put on incorruption. The life of all flesh being in the blood, and therefore the resurrected body not so dependent upon the blood. When Jesus appeared to his disciples, they thought they were seeing a ghost. But Jesus said to them, "Touch me, feel me, a spirit. Have not flesh and bones, as ye now see me have." So Jesus gave all of his life blood for mankind, the life of all flesh being in the blood. So Jesus shed his blood, give his whole blood, so kind of like his whole blood. All of his blood drained out of his body throughout the process of the crucifixion. And finally, the soldier digging a spear into Jesus' side, and water and blood came out. And yet there was Jesus 3 days later, very much alive, and appearing to the disciples and saying to them, "A spirit, have not flesh and bones, as ye now see me have." So Jesus showing us that he'd conquered death. Adam was ate of the forbidden fruit and brought death into the world. But Jesus reversing all of this and taking a punishment for mankind, dying the death of a sinner, taking his last breath on the cross and crying out to God, saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" So in other words, God forsook Jesus whilst Jesus was on that cross. And therefore Jesus, being separated from God, died of a broken heart. So Jesus dying of a broken heart by being separated from God on a cross while shedding all of his blood for mankind. So a lot of people don't quite understand this. It's how Jesus died. He died being separated from God. He no doubt died of the trauma of being whipped 39 times, carrying his own cross, and then being on that cross for 6 hours, shedding all of his lifeblood. Finally he says, "I thirst." So he's thirsting for the living God. He's no doubt thirsty as his life blood drains out of him. And therefore, finally, he gives his last breath when God suddenly forsakes him. So in other words, sinning is a separation from God. So God can't have anything to do with evil. So when we enter into sin and rebelling against God, we are forsaken of God and therefore not in the eternal presence of God's Spirit. So Jesus took a punishment in that he became separated from God whilst on a cross. So whilst on that cross, 6 hours into his awful ordeal, Jesus suddenly gives out a loud cry saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" In other words, Jesus had done nothing wrong, and therefore God forsook him. And Jesus, in this, dying for the sins of mankind, became separated from God as we are. So this is the message of the gospel, and this is what Paul taught. So it's interesting to look into all of this and get further understanding from Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So here's Paul himself, and he's saying, "Moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel." What is the gospel? That is the gospel that Jesus, a lot of people think, okay, Jesus came and died for the sins of mankind. Can't you elaborate? Well, to elaborate, dying meant he died in our sins and not his own. He died, in other words, in separation from God as we are. Not that he was ever separated from God, even from the very beginning. Down through the ages and from eternity, Jesus was never, ever separated from God. So Jesus leaves his place in heaven comes to earth with the awful understanding that he's coming to take a punishment for mankind. And the ultimate in that punishment was obviously the whipping and the beating and carrying his cross and being on that cross for 6 hours, dying before the two thieves that were with him. How come? How did he die before the two sinners that were with him, the two thieves that were either side of him? He died when God forsook him. So a lot of people don't understand this. He died in our separation from God. He died in our sins, in our